In the past, it was a staple of kidnappings for the hostage to hold up a newspaper to prove that they were still alive. The problem with me is that I started reading the newspapers I was holding up, although I'm still, as you can judge by our social media overlords, in captivity. Nevertheless, I'll try my best to get what news I can out to you given the constraints. First up, stories on the domestic news front that I'm tracking. Your briefing begins with the headline, Judge says feds can't selectively prosecute right-wing rioters while ignoring Antifa. A judge in California threw out charges against two far-right political agitators, saying the federal government engaged in selective prosecution by charging right-wing rioters, but not the far-left agitators they fought against, and who did the exact same thing. Robert Rundo and Robert Bowman attended a pro-Donald Trump free speech rally in Berkeley on April 15, 2017. As members of Rise Against movement, RAM, a far-right white nationalist group that engaged in violence against left-wing groups like Antifa. One of those groups was By Any Means Necessary, which would descend upon right-wing events to shut them down and start fights. Antifa and related far-left groups decided they needed to shut this down. They came prepared for violence, bringing weapons including pepper spray, fireworks, knives, and homemade bombs, Judge Cormac J. Carney of the U.S. District Court of the Central District of California wrote on February 21st. And they used those weapons, as well as their bodies, against Trump supporters and law enforcement. This is actually a rare case of the justice system working, and surprisingly, it's from California, because, of course, judges are not supposed to do what they call viewpoint discrimination. Like the law forbids them to, make any judgments based on race, color, or creed. Well, what is creed? Creed comes from the Latin credo, which means belief, right? So they're not supposed to discriminate against you based on your belief system, and conservatism is a belief system, right? It's a creed. It is literally illegal to discriminate on that basis, and this judge is correctly pointing that out to the FBI, who are doing viewpoint discrimination, and they are basically protecting Antifa, like Christopher Wray, who, when he was asked, why aren't you going after Antifa? And he was like, how can we go after Antifa? Antifa is just an idea. How could we possibly do it? When you look into the origins of Antifa, it becomes very clear what they actually are. They're basically paid goon squads, and the government is using these paid goon squads, much like another government back in the 20th century in Europe used goon squads against political opponents. And this is something very rare in our country's history, but unfortunately we're there, and they're using these goon squads and not prosecuting them. Why? Because they're doing the bidding of the state. So this is actually good that the judge is harking back to our old system, where the judge is supposed to occupy a central position between the prosecution and defense. And it's very similar to Aristotle's golden mean, right? Like where he has, the ideal of something, right? So truth might be the ideal, honor, justice, but let's just take truth for an example. That's the ideal. And for every ideal, there's a defect and there's an excess. So the excess would be exaggeration of truth, right? The excess is exaggeration, and the defect is irony, right? And so that's how they conceptualize law, that you might have an excess and a defect, a prosecution and a defense, but between them is supposed to be the judge who acts as a pivot point for objectivity. And that is our old legal system. The CIA, by the way, has tried to subvert that by teaching new kind of law school graduates that the purpose of law is not supposed to be equality for the law. You're supposed to put a thumb on the scales of law, to get certain outcomes based on viewpoint discrimination. And the law is not supposed to work for a majority, but supposed to work for a minority. They're actually teaching this now. And this is antithetical to our old legal system. So it's kind of good to see a judge harking back to our old pre-CIA legal system. And that brings us into international news. Leaked military files show Russia's nuclear strike threshold is lower than previously known. This week, the Financial Times has published contents of a cache of leaked classified Russian documents said to lay out the country's doctrine and strategy for tactical nuclear weapons use. Included in the document is info on the Kremlin's minimum criteria for using tactical nukes. The criteria outlined in the secret files range from an enemy incursion on Russian territory to more specific triggers, such as the destruction of 20% of Russia's strategic ballistic missile submarines, according to FT. The question of the possibility of Russia and NATO stumbling toward nuclear war was without doubt heavy on the minds of many this week, especially after French President Emmanuel Macron's Monday comments, wherein he raised sending Western troops to fight Russia and Ukraine, and said of the possibility, nothing should be ruled out. Since World War II and the development of the atomic bomb, conventional war was claimed to be obsolete. which is why they let it slide into disuse and can't provide bullets to the Ukraine. We've heard reports about that if we actually did have a hot war, we would have only enough ammunition for about 2 weeks. And there's a military historian named Martin Van Creveld, and he has a book, I believe it's called Transformation of War. And in the book, he talks about the fact that after nukes were invented, everybody was scared to have a conventional war. So all of the assets, all of the allocations of resources went from the military to intelligence agencies. And the Cold War would be fought by the CIA and KGB, MI6, Mossad, and all these things. So they found their budgets bloated, while the military was kind of like left to, kind of rot away and rust. And so because of that, we don't have the capacities that we did, the industrial capacity to actually build tanks and planes or even steel, the components necessary for war. And so, because of this, there's a certain measure of incompetence that will tilt the game in favor of the usage of unconventional weapons like bioweapons or small tactical nukes. At any rate, let's step away from the craziness of international relations for a moment by stepping into the news of the weird. The inimitable Alex Stein is at it again, trolling any city council or school board meeting that he can with an open mic.
The first one is Alex Stein.
You don't know who you're about to speak to. The one, the only, 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. Are you there, President Trump?
Well, of course, I'm happy that you're talking to the city council. I hear they're tremendous people, and I hear we're going to be bringing these shoes in. These are tremendous shoes. They're hotter than Nikki Haley in an Escalade. You know what I'm talking about? We want to see the children. We want to see them wear the shoes and perform in the shoes and do a tremendous job in the shoes. Isn't that right? Isn't that correct?
Yes, President Trump, you making the shoes mandatory for all school uniforms in Plano School District would be great, and I think that would help the city. But I'm telling you, the mayor here is one of these woke mayors. He loves all the transgender stuff. As a matter of fact, he actually wants to put mandatory gender reassignment into the schools, state-sponsored.
Well, I think that's terrible. And, the only person that I talk to who goes from man to woman, his name is Lindsey Graham. You know who I'm saying? He sits when he pees, but you can look at it and you can talk about all of these different things. I think it's a terrible idea what you're doing. And I think we should absolutely look at this mayor. I think we have to look at him. Maybe we have to replace him. Maybe we have to get rid of him like Chris Christie gets rid of a plate of donuts. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
very fast.
He loves to eat. Okay, so President Trump, what is going on with Nikki Haley and her running for president? I mean, what's going on? These Plano people, I don't know. I think some of these board members support her.
Well, if they support her, that's interesting because she lost to somebody called Nota, that N-O-T-A, none of the above. And it's terrible. She is only good at doing things in the back of a car. I call it the escapade in an Escalade, and she ought to be ashamed of herself. And if you support her, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I have to say that. And I think if you're supporting Nikki Haley, you have a lot of other things to think about. You're probably crazier than the people who said white powder to Don Jr. You heard about that? They sent it to him. I think Hunter Biden was trying to send my son mail. I think he thinks he's a pen pal, and that's not acceptable. We don't want to do that.
No, and President Trump, they tried to kill my biological stepfather in Russia. Are you going to get vengeance on my father? Tucker
Of course,
Carlson.
I got along very well with Russia. I got along very well with Putin, and we're going to get vengeance on Ukraine. They tried to do terrible things to Tucker. He's your biological stepfather. You look just like him. And we want to help him. We want to make sure that he survives. Protect Tucker at all costs. That's what we're going to do.
President Trump, they're kicking us out. Thank you, President Trump. These people aren't worth your time, but thank you so much. And free shoes to all the Plano ISD school members, mandatory in their school uniform. Thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless you. God bless.
God bless. Thank you, President.
I like how Stein used his phone to dial up the laughter regarding the promotion of the new Trump sneakers, and no one is sneakier than Alex Stein. Too bad the board members were humorless and looked like the living dead. Speaking of the living dead, that leads us into our obituary segment. Former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney has died. Former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, who forged close ties with two Republican U.S. presidents through a sweeping trade agreement that was once vilified but now celebrated, died Thursday. He was 84. The country's 18th Prime Minister died peacefully and surrounded by family, daughter Carolyn Mulroney said in a post on X. Mulroney's family said last summer he was improving daily after a heart procedure that followed treatment for prostate cancer in early 2023. A family spokesman said Morrone died at a hospital in Palm Beach, Florida, where he was being treated after a recent fall. Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party from 1983 to 1993, Mulroney served almost a decade as Prime Minister after he was first elected in 1984 after snagging the largest majority in Canadian history with 211 of 282 seats. And with that, I'd like to thank you for watching the show, or as I like to call it, that suspicious gap in my resume. See you next time. Consider subscribing to my new podcast, Classic Paranormal. It's a clearinghouse for lost real-life accounts of true ghost stories. It's found on Apple Podcasts. Go there now if you're interested in enigmatic tales, chilling true accounts, chronicles from cases of the past that time has forgotten, but that the modern person who likes relaxing by a campfire swapping ghost stories might appreciate. As I said, the new podcast I'm launching is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there's a link in the description below on this video.